and KMWC Bethany. On the web at kdkr.org and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, Trump's massive spending plan is signed and delivered. What is its effect on student loans? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, the politicians have drastically made changes in student loan repayment. College admissions and student loan expert John Hupalo is here to give us his input. You know, John, I woke up this morning knowing I needed to prep for this program, and I didn't really have I had no idea that they had covered student loans like they did in the big, beautiful bill, whatever you call it. I can't even say that without laughing, but so I was a little surprised.
Yeah, Bob, honestly, I've been laughing about the big, beautiful bill. Just the name is just so precious. But I got up and, you prompt me to really start thinking about this. I actually think the big, beautiful bill is not a bad outcome for students and families planning and paying for college going forward. I really look forward to this conversation today because the more I thought about it, the better I felt about it.
Well, let's cover it this way. Let's go. I'm going to go one by one. You go through the changes, explanation of the new laws, comparison to the current, and then I want you to give it a grade. Give it either an A or a pass or a big fail. For the first one is student loan holders would be given a choice between two options to pay back loans.
Yeah, Bob, I give that an A. And so I'll tell you why. For too long, there were too many options. I think we've talked about this in the past. I call it the Baskin-Robbins problem. I love to go to the ice cream shop and vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. I can make that decision. But when there are 31 flavors and all the rest of it, then I'm sitting there and I'm hemming. And the students had the same problem, I think. There were all these different options. They were very complicated. How much are you making? How much are you going to make? Do you want to defer? What? And so now they've streamlined it. And they streamlined it basically into two programs. And I think at the beginning, let's just make sure that all your listeners understand that nothing changes for this next group of students who are going to enroll in college in a year from now. So the process for high school seniors is just exactly the same as it was for high school seniors last year. They're going to have to fill out that FAFSA form to get the federal aid. The loan rate for the loans that they will get will take effect on July 1, 2026, just exactly the way it occurred this year. They haven't changed the formula about the way the loan rate will be set. They haven't changed any of the loan limits, which I think is sort of a mixed blessing. We can talk about that, but it's going to be the same. In a year from now, students who are going to be starting are going to be able to borrow $5,500 just like this class is. So when I started thinking about it, I think for the undergraduate independent students, actually not much has changed. It's for some of the others. But what that you identified the one thing that will change, and that is starting in another year from now, those loans that start entering repayment, there are only going to be two options: the standard plan or this other plan that they're calling the repayment assistant plan, the RAP plan. So I give that an A. I think streamlining it, making it more simple, better for the students, also better for the student loan servicers. They don't have to worry about all these. I think at one point there were 8 or 9 different repayment plans, and if the students weren't put in the plan properly, then all of a sudden the servicer got a big bang on the head from the CFPB and the Department of Education saying, why are you not implementing our programs correctly? So I give the standardization and the new payment plans an A. I think it's a great idea.
I tell you what, I will say this about Trump. He's the first person to come in and grab this mess and say, let's do something about it, and actually made some pretty bold moves. So the second one is increase the time period to pay off student loans to 30 years. What do you think about that?
So that's related to this repayment assistance plan that we were just talking about. So the way the plans basically work is that you are able under the what's called the standard plan or the repayment plan, the RAP plan. If you're in a situation when you graduate from school and you have 3 or 4 federal loans and maybe at some point you have some graduate loans in there as well, you can consolidate them into one payment. Good for everybody, right? And what they did is they said if you have total amount of federal borrowing more than $60,000, you're going to be able to push that out 30 years. In the past, it was 25, which also, though, means then that the loan forgiveness that program that they have out there won't come into effect until after 30 years. So, I mean, when you think about that, Bobby, you're 22 or 25 or 27 years old, plus 30, that gets you pretty close to 60 before you're going to be done paying off your loan. So you still need to be careful about how much you're going to borrow, but they did extend that period by 5 years.
Hey, think about it. That's like a mortgage on a house.
100%. 100%, so a grade on that, I think I kind of give it a pass. What they're trying to do is to make it so that your income can carry your payments, and they try to streamline that a little bit. I just don't love the idea of paying off a mortgage for your education over a 30-year period. It's an awful lot of time.
The next one is doing away with current plus system for graduate loans and adding a cap on the loans at $100,000 for most students. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and this becomes the question. I don't know, Bob, that I haven't heard anyone argue that colleges are not charging enough for their services. And this is one of those things where you say, oh, that doesn't sound very good. The grad students are going to have no more grad plus, and then they're going to put a cap on how much they can borrow, and that's going to change the choice. And then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, wait a minute. When I read in the newspaper about the students who get out of school and they have this horrendous amount of debt, $100,000+, it's not the undergraduates. It's almost always the grad students. And some of them are professional grad students where they go in, they get one degree, and then they go get another degree, and then another degree, and then they're 40 years old, and they have $130,000 of debt and a $30,000 a year job. And so, again, this is one of those things where you say, yes, the grad students, I think, out of all of the participants in the program, so we're talking about the students who are dependent and independent undergraduate students. The second group is the graduates, and the third group is the parents. I think the grad students are the ones that are going to get hit the hardest, and they might have to start making that really significant choice of saying, I've got to think before I start this program, am I going to make enough money when I get out to repay my loan? And by the way, if this grad program is charging me 60 or 80 or 100 or 120,000, and those aren't made up numbers, those are real numbers for some of these MBA programs and others. Well, maybe I just should get another degree. They're not going to give me the money. It's not going to come from heaven. So maybe I should find something that will give me a better return on my investment. So the more I thought about that, the more I'm thinking this is a pretty good move. It's going to not settle well for some students. But in the end of the day, they might actually be doing them a favor.
Having gone down this road with Blaine, it's just so important for it to be a really good thought out. This is the reason I want to go to grad school, and this is how it's going to pay off. And I think that people a lot of times students go to grad school for maybe some of the wrong reasons.
I agree, and I saw it firsthand with my daughter, who went to one of the great MBA programs, 1-year program, and Bob, she's graduated with a mortgage worth of debt, which under the new program, she would not be eligible to borrow. And I sit there and I scratch my head. I think, honestly, it's going to work out great for her, but it hasn't worked out great yet, and there are plenty of other students who would be in a situation where they probably would be better off not paying those big dollars for these grad programs that may or may not give them a job. that makes them that much better off. So again, I'm coming down on this big beautiful bill thinking it's bigger and more beautiful than ugly and terrible.
If you want more information on John, mycollegecorner.org. It is .org, isn't it?
No, it's a .com.
No, it's .com. Okay, mycollegecorner.com.
Yep. .com. Yes, sir.
Let's talk a little bit about private loans. Is that even something that's feasible?
Yeah, so what's really interesting, Bob, is that for undergraduate students, I started by saying not much has changed. And the more I thought about it, I thought, unfortunately, one of the things that has not changed is the amount that they can borrow under the federal program. And again, I think responsible borrowing within the realm of where you're going to have a job that pays you more than you borrowed to get the degree, that can be good. But here's the fact. The student loan limits for freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors has not changed since July of 2008. And we know that the cost of college has gone up quite a lot since 2008. And so here's the point that it's a little bit of a nuance, and some folks are going to say, wait a minute, what are you arguing? Well, my argument is that because freshmen can only borrow $5,500 today and next year and in the foreseeable future, and those costs are going up, there are some students who are then going to have to go to the private loan market and get a deal that's probably not as good for them as they could have gotten if the loan limits were increased slightly. So I think on the student undergraduate side, it would have been helpful if they increased those loan limits by a little. I'm not saying a lot, but just a little bit more to, basically give you an offset against all the cost increases that have occurred since 2008.
Now, this next one I know that you're definitely going to agree with. What about the change with Parent Plus loans, one of your favorite topics?
Yeah, I'm like standing on top of my buildings shouting from the rafters saying it's about time. Do I think they went far enough? Maybe not, but I was so happy to see, in fact, that they are going to put a cap on the amount that parents can borrow. I think parents come out of this, again, as I'm going to say as winners, but there are going to be those on the other side that are saying, well, you're not seeing this right. And I'll tell you, both sides of that coin are very simple. With no basic credit underwriting criteria for the PLUS loan program, and previously the amount to borrow whatever you wanted, I had a real problem with that. But now that they're putting a cap on the amount that can be borrowed under the PLUS loan program, and I think it's a good cap. It's $20,000 per year per student. Then a $65,000 cap for the lifetime for a student. That, I think, helps parents, quite honestly, avoid taking on excessive amounts of debt to get their kids through college. So, yes, I am heartened by that. I give that kind of like a B because I think it's great that they capped it. I don't think it's great that they continue to say that there's basically no requirement for income to actually afford that debt. But that's, that was probably a very well considered compromise to get to the point where they were. So at the end of the day, I think it's a definite step forward and a plus for parents.
The next one is getting rid of deferment options for economic hardship and unemployment. John, I think that when people have an option that's kind of a way out, that maybe they don't try some avenues or some roads to get themselves back up and employed or something like that. I hope that makes sense. But this seems like maybe a good thing.
Yeah, this is one of those interesting, and we kind of identify, Bob, we're on the tip of a double-edged sword here, where generally coming down thinking it's favorable. Clearly, there's a whole group of folks who are going to say, oh, this is really not a good idea. But I think fundamentally what gives me the message from the big, beautiful bill for education is this idea, the restoration of some kind of contractual obligation you have to repay the loans, right? We're not talking about how much is going to be forgiven. We're not talking about any of this. We're saying, look, we think if you want to borrow money and you're borrowing it from the federal government, we want you to be smart about how much you borrow. We're going to help you with some guidelines to make that happen. We're going to make the repayment process easier with only 2 options instead of 8 or 9. And we really do want you to pay this loan. right? And so I think they've done a pretty good job, quite honestly, of trying to strike that balance, saying, just this idea of deferring. Remember, and this is what got people into trouble, and we've talked about this over the last several years, deferment doesn't mean that you don't have to pay the interest. It means it just piles up. And so that's how we get through these economic hardships or unemployment hardships, and people stay on those programs longer than they need to. All they've done was increase the total amount that they've borrowed from the government, and then they're paying interest on that larger amount, and that's how we got to these, in part, again, generalizing, but that's how we got to bigger outstanding balances that people then couldn't afford when they're 50, 60, or more years old.
I love this next one. I've always been a very big advocate of this. It says loans can be rehabilitated from default 2 times versus one time the way it's currently written.
Yeah, that's one actually I was kind of shaking my head a little bit. So the idea here is that when you rehab a loan currently, it says, okay, I had a problem, I went into default, I made a certain number of payments on time, and then I was basically able to bring my loan current. And then we're going to allow that cycle to repeat. And this is one where I'm kind of on the fence, Bob. I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't seen any data about the number of repeat defaulters, so it's hard to know, which is why I saw this one as a little bit of a curveball, because I wasn't sure where this came from. I hadn't been tracking that as something that there was discussion of. For instance, one of the things that was not included was having the loan limits based on the major. Right, and so that I thought was sort of like an interesting idea that is apparently was shot down somewhere in the process, for better or for worse. You can argue both sides of that, but I think making it simple is better than not. And this is one of those issues where I'm really not sure who was advocating for the second round of default rehab. But again, if you're allowing folks who got into trouble once or twice to get out of trouble, who can be against that? At the end of the day, it's not a bad idea.
You mentioned this a little while ago about the start date being July 26th. If you had your way, would you start this a little bit, maybe July 27th, or do you think 1 year is a good? Because if you think about it, there's probably, prior to this bill going through, there was a lot of parents who might have been planning on financing college a certain way, and that's now a big not an option for them.
Yeah, I like the start date next year, Bob, for 2 reasons. One, the changes that they've made to the program won't require a lot of changes to existing systems. The FAFSA system doesn't seem like it's going to change. They're going to tweak the formulas a little bit. Pell Grant eligibility, we haven't touched on that yet, but they've actually done something which I think could really be good. They've started, in effect, a new Pell Grant program that allows basically for, they're calling it the workforce Pell. So students could be eligible to get some money even if they're not going to a 4-year program. It's more for a short-term accredited workforce training kind of program. But again, the idea is you just don't need a lot of time to program this. And I go back, I checked our notes, and I love to keep notes on this, but in July last year, July 2024, you and I were talking about the FAFSA fiasco and what's going to happen in the fall and all this uncertainty. There's no uncertainty now. We know what's going to happen. There'll be a little discussion about some of the rulemaking around this, but for the most part, it's really clear for students who are going to start going to school next year and the years forward what's going to change and what's not going to change. So I think there's plenty of time for folks to make this adjustment. Again, grad students get hit harder. They had some plans. But we're still a year or 2 out, so they haven't even applied yet for those programs that could be affected by these caps. So I think it was fair warning and a fair implementation schedule.
John's website is mycollegecorner.com if you want more information. And John, now there were, right up until the bill was signed, there were about 6 small changes. So just be aware of that if you're looking into this right now. But a couple of things I want to ask you about. I think that the good thing is that it seems to me that there's no way that you can borrow 100% of your college education. It looks that they've closed all those loopholes.
By putting a cap on the Parent Plus loan, they definitely closed that loophole. Now, what's going to happen, though, Bob, the other side of this, and you mentioned it before, the private loan market is going to start to absorb some of this demand from the graduate students. So it's going to be interesting because the private loan market is going to put credit criteria on those loans. And again, it's going to go back to this point. If your credit is not good, meaning, and I'll throw out a number and saying, somewhere like in the 700, 720 and above, you're going to be able to get a loan. But you have to be really careful of what that loan rate's going to be, and then how much you're going to make once you get out of school to make sure that you can afford that particular debt. So it's this economic reckoning, I think, for grad programs is coming. And in all reckonings, it's going to be painful for some folks. They're going to have to make choices that they didn't think they were going to have to previously make. And I'm going to argue that it's not a bad thing. I came out of. Let me put it this way: I came into the thinking about what we're going to talk about today, land of last week, thinking, "Gee, I don't know about this bill." And then the more I thought about it, the more I think it creates winners pretty much all the way around.
Well, tell me this: we all know that debt plays a big part in the whole process of going to college and getting your degree. What does this do to that experience now? I mean, it's got to have some kind of an effect on it.
Yeah, 100% it will. But again, I go back to the point that I'm all for borrowing an adequate, smart amount for school. And the system, I think, has been set up and it has been advertised as total access. Whatever you want to go for your education, if you want to go get 3 graduate degrees, we're going to let you go pursue your dreams. Never has it been said there's an economic cost to that. And we saw what happened with the defaults over a period of time. So I think that at the end of the day, this could be a good thing for all, as I said before, students, for the schools. Schools might have to look at lowering their price or keeping their price constant because there's not going to be this ready supply of flush federal cash just to take all comers all the time. So I'm coming out of this feeling more optimistic than pessimistic for students and parents who need to repay this debt.
Well, there's no question it won't be a little bit painful. I mean, just because you're going from one extreme to another. But the last question that I do have for you, John. A year ago, we had Democrats wanting free college, and you've swung all the way over to what Trump has done. I mean, how in the world did that happen? I mean, they were pretty passionate about their free college idea.
Yeah, it was the election. It was just very simple. The change in Congress. I mean, let's make no. There's no surprise in this, right? The vice president had to cast the tie-breaking vote to get this through the Senate, right? So it's 50-50. He came. So it's not like there's this huge mandate, and which is why, Bob, I think we came a lot closer to I'm going to say the center, if you can think there's a center in politics right now, but we came a lot closer where, some of what came out of the House of Representatives about school accountability, about tying majors and the amount you can borrow, some of that other stuff, some Pell Grant reductions and all the rest, on the Senate side was really tempered, right? And so we got back to something that looks to me like is more of a compromise that we should be able to live with. Yes, there'll be some pain, but I think the total net of this is going to be positive for students and families.
Yeah, and hopefully now they're in a position where they can get these major changes done, and then they can start tweaking the system to make it better. And I hope that they go that route.
I'm with you, and I think that's what's going to happen. As I said, I'm optimistic of the way this whole thing came out.
Once again, if you want more information on John, mycollegecorner.com is the website to go to and check it out. And I'm assuming you're going to be writing a piece on this here pretty soon. Is that an accurate guess?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, you as you did last month, you spurred me to think about this, and I'm going to do that and put a piece out there. There's something up on my College Corner right now. The last piece that we put up, the last blog post that went up, says federal loan interest rates are lower. Are they the right choice for you? It's talking about for students right now how to make this choice between borrowing in the federal market and evaluating a federal plus loan versus a private loan. So hopefully your listeners will find that helpful as well.
Once again, mycollegecorner.com. John, great talk to you. We'll look forward to next month.
Me as well, Bob. Be well. Enjoy this month of July.
This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.